is going to be our the shortest meeting in history. I would like to approve the minutes. Councilmember Zvonek, Councilmember Lawson, do you have any changes, or are you willing to approve the minutes?
I have no changes.
Okay, so general business, annual update from oil and gas.
Very good. Good morning, Councilmember Jurinsky and other council members. Pleasure to be here this morning. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. All right, for those of you listening, my name is Jeffrey Moore. I'm the manager of the Oil and Gas Division. Pleasure to be here with you today. As most of you know, the Oil and Gas Division is relatively new, started in 2020. I was the first manager of the division and very honored to be so. I did this update last year at this time at PED, and it was well received, and council members asked me to return on an annual basis and provide an update of what we're doing. So that is the topics today. We'll be talking about our staffing, number of wells that we have, looking at the operators, permitting and inspections, which are our main functions here in the division. We'll be talking about the income that we have for the division, our work in supporting the Oil and Gas Advisory Committee, and future initiatives. To begin with staffing, our senior inspector is Forrest Thornley. Today is actually his 2-year anniversary with the division. He's been with the city for 5 years, but with the division for 2. Very excited to have him. Bachelor's degree in environmental studies, lots of experience and certifications with inspections. Our senior planner is new this year in July. Maria Alvarez is very well qualified. She has a master's in urban and regional planning, and she's also a native Spanish speaker, which is exciting. She's interested in helping us translate some of the educational materials that we are creating into Spanish for our website. All right, number of wells. So I've got a running track here by year, just so you can see how things have changed from year to year. The most important category, of course, is the producing wells. Currently, we have 108 of those. And I'll talk about the different operators here in just a moment. You can see how that's grown from 45 just 3 years ago. So we've increased the number of wells quite a bit. Wells that are either being drilled or completed currently, there's 22 of those. Next category is shut-in wells. These are wells that are really no longer economic, they're no longer producing. Very excited to see these numbers going down. When I started with the division, we had 9 of those wells, but we've had several operators that have elected to plug their wells, which is a requirement by the state rules, of course, but some operators don't do that. City and County of Denver and Peterson Energy plugged their wells in 2020 and 2021. So we're down to only 2 wells remaining, and I'll discuss those here on the next slide specifically. Finally, on the plugged wells, P&A is plugged and abandoned. That means a well that did produce, but then ended its productive life and was later plugged. DNA is dry and abandoned. That's a well that was drilled, but did not encounter hydrocarbons in paying quantities and was plugged immediately after drilling. We have 58 of those in the city. And then the final category is the future or projected wells. These are based on our operator agreements and based on the plans for the field with the different operators that we have. You can see that we've kind of halved that from the end of last year. The reason for that is that the work that Crestone Peak Resources has done in the field to substantially reduce both the number of sites that they're drilling and the number of wells by over 100, based on how they're designing and drilling the field compared to how ConocoPhillips originally planned to build out the field. They made a substantial reduction in those impacts, which is really amazing. So we think there'll be about 150 wells drilled in the future from this point forward here within the city. Obviously, the city is always growing by annexation. We may annex new wells into the city. We may annex new lands that have wells to be drilled on them in the future, but that's a good estimate for the time being. Now, talking about the operators, Crestone Peak Resources, which is part of Civitas, is our major operator. 108 producing wells, 12 wells being drilled and completed. Axis Exploration, which is also part of Civitas, has 2 producing wells, and then they have 8 wells that they are going to be drilling and completing starting in December. That's the Jameso pad. They started drilling those quite several years ago, but they're coming back to complete those in December. The other 2 operators that we still have, the next is Painted Pegasus Petroleum. They are officially out of business as of March of this year. I testified at a hearing at the Oil and Gas Commission about our efforts to contact them. They are bankrupt, out of business, and that well has been placed on the state's Orphan Well Program list, the OWP. The state will plug that well at their cost. We are hoping to get that done in 2023, but we are at the discretion of the state planning and how the commission wants to plug the wells. They've got almost 1,000 orphan wells in the state currently that they are working through the list to get those plugged. The last operator we have is KP Kaufman. KP Kaufman has not been a very good operator either for Aurora or in the state. They had a massive fine last year by the COGCC. They agreed to do work in lieu of that fine, or most of that fine. They only have one well in Aurora, which is great. Technically, it's still producing a barrel per month on some months, but in general, it is not economic. It needs to be plugged. We are working with them to try to get that plugged as soon as possible, but we are at their discretion as well in that regard. And they have many other wells that are much greater concern to both them and the state. All right, so here's a map showing where those wells are located. The wells in the spots in green are the ones that are currently either drilling or completing. The rig today for Crestone Peak Resources is at the Lone Tree North. That's where the star is there in the bottom part of the map. They will continue drilling those through the end of the year and then can be completing them next year. So these green sites are all sites that are finishing up the completion process, and then they'll come online for production in 2023. The red dots are all the other producing locations. Keep in mind, you won't see 130 dots there because these represent well sites, and each well site has multiple wells on the site. And then, of course, the black dots are the plugged wells, which I'll talk about a little more next. The blue dots here that I will add, these are the future well sites that are yet to be drilled that Crestone Peak Resources has indicated they're planning to drill. As I said, there are other sites that are approved in the operator agreement, but they have elected not to drill all of those sites. So this kind of gets you a feel for where those locations would be drilling in the next 3 to 4 years. Since 2020, we have had 15 wells out of the 58 plugged wells that we have either plugged originally or replugged. Now, why is this important? It's important because historically, the industry felt that when a well was plugged, that was kind of the end of its story and there was nothing else to be done. What we've learned in the last several decades is that the cement and the casing, the steel casing in the ground do deteriorate over time, and most wells will need to be replugged at some point in the future. The rules at the state level have also changed over time. Excuse me. Have also changed over time and become much more. There's a lot stronger rules at the state level on the plugging of the wells today than there was in the decades past. So bringing these wells up to modern standards is really exciting. If the operator was not here, if Crestone was not here in the city, they would not be doing this work for us. And so getting these wells replugged to modern standards is really exciting. It should put these on track to be very well taken care of for many, many decades to come. So that's a very exciting thing that's happening. They have additional wells that they're planning to plug in the next 2 years as part of their drilling program. So we're excited about that as well, about another dozen in the city. Those 2 shut-in wells that I mentioned earlier, Painted Pegasus, is both these are north of I-70. The Painted Pegasus well is in the very far northeastern corner of the city. The KP Kaufman well is there on the screen, a little bit closer to DIA. So that's the locations of those 2 wells. All right, let's talk about a little bit about production. And don't worry, I'm going to zoom in on this graph right now. Next slide, because I know that this is very difficult to see the numbers of. This is all the production in Aurora since 1999. 1999 is when the State Oil and Gas Commission began splitting out production to individual wells rather than reporting on a lease or unit basis. And so you can see there was some production back in the early 2000s, but most of it's been in the last decade since the first Niobrara well was drilled. Let me zoom in on this now. All right, so here's production in the last decade. The first Niobrara Formation well, which is the first horizontal well, was drilled in February of 2013. On this graph, we've got natural gas in the red, and the values on the graph itself are in units per month. So for the natural gas, that's MCF per month. The green is the oil production, and that is in barrels per month. And the water is the produced water that comes out with the oil and gas, and that is in blue, also in barrels per month. On the axis on the right is the well count, and that's the gray line. You can see that's increasing from about 10 back in 2013 all the way up to 94, which is the number of wells that are currently contributing to this particular graph. This graph is data through August of this year, so it's very recent. I just completed this update this week and added in those last couple of points in the last quarter for this particular presentation. You can also see here where Conoco signed the operator agreement with the city in June of 2019, and then where Crestone purchased the field from Conoco in the spring of 2020. To break down those monthly numbers into daily values, I have those on the right. Currently, the field is producing within the city limits of Aurora natural gas of about 27,000 MCF per day, oil of 14,500 barrels per day, and about 1,300 barrels per water per day. So these are big numbers. This is a lot of production that's coming from Aurora currently. With this data, I've been able to generate something that's called a type curve. A type curve is where we take all of the wells that are producing in Aurora and we take them back to a common time zero. So whether they've been producing for 10 years or producing for a few months, we take that production and bring it back to a common time zero and then see what does the production look like over time on an average basis. And you can see the values here: natural gas about 20,000 MCF a month at the very beginning, oil of 17,000 barrels a month, water of 14,000 barrels per month. Again, this is a single well, and a well site would have anywhere from 1 to 8 wells typically, but this is an individual well basis. The reason that this is interesting and helpful is I'm now taking this data from the type curve and we'll be applying it to the wells that are being drilled that have Aurora minerals under them. We have some production that we get now from Crestone, some royalties. We'll discuss that in a few minutes. And then we also have other leases that we've signed this year for wells that were either drilled this year or will be drilling early next year. So the city royalties do change over time. You can see that all these production values here, they do decrease significantly and rapidly up front. There's a very steep decline. Within the first 4 years, they recover somewhere between 65 and 75% of all the production that the well will have. However, there is a very long tail of production, and how long the well's produced really depends on commodity prices and operation prices for the operator, how much it costs to operate the well on a monthly basis. As long as they're profitable, they're going to keep those wells open and producing likely for 25 years, we would expect. But I'll use this data, and I'm working on some spreadsheets that try to project on a quarterly basis what we think royalty income might be for the city in the decade ahead. I get that question from the budget office quite frequently. These royalties are variable. They change from month to month and year to year. How do we know how much we're going to get and when is it going to come? So that data is something that's going to be forthcoming. All right, let's talk a little about the two main functions that our department does. The first is permitting. These are the numbers of permits that have been actually submitted in this calendar year and approved in this calendar year, keeping in mind that sometimes there is overlap and year to year, calendar years, and how long it takes to get these approved. The operator agreement allows 13 weeks for the well sites. That includes time for the operator to respond to each round of comments, and sometimes they don't respond in the time that they're expected to respond. So we're prepared to do these in 3 months, 13 weeks, but in some cases it takes longer than that if the operator does delay. I'm very pleased to say that 100% of the applications we've received this year were all processed within the timeframes agreed upon in the operator agreement. I'm very pleased with the work we've done there. Some of the details here, the laterals that you see, the word lateral: crude oil pipeline, lateral pipeline, and natural gas lateral pipeline. The details of that is we have a natural gas gathering system that's constructed, and we have a crude oil gathering system that's mostly constructed here in the city. But when the operator drills an individual well site, they then have to put a short line in to connect the well site to the closest point of the gathering system itself. And so that requires a separate application. And those are the things you see here. We received those. We've approved almost all of those so far. This year, we've got, I think, one remaining that needs to be approved. On the well sites, the reason they're not all approved yet, one of them is the King North well site, which council members may know has been part of the discussions between Crestone and Aurora Highlands. And the operator has not submitted the last submission on that yet. We are expecting them to do so, but I know that there may be some changes based on the deal that they have with Aurora Highlands, which just happened last week. So we'll look to see if there's any changes there. The second one is one that we just had the pre-app for last week, and we expect that submission here very, very soon. The other thing that we do with on the permitting side is we do review every pre-app that comes into the city. So every request for a pre-application meeting and then the subsequent application, the Oil and Gas Division reviews that information for every developer, and then we help them understand and provide comments of how oil and gas may be affecting their particular project area. Whether it's in the urban area of the city, whether it's out in the developing area, we review those. We let them know if there's any plugged wells on their property, any pipelines, any oil and gas locations, or proposed future locations. We make sure that they're aware, they have the information that we have, so that if they have questions about that, we're available to answer that. So we've always done that, and we will continue to do that in the future. The next big part of our division is inspections. We do inspections at every stage of development for the wells, beginning with the construction phase, then moving on into drilling, completions. Production phase, of course, is the major opportunity to do well site inspections. We do those on a quarterly basis. The other phases are as needed. So anytime a site's being constructed, we're out there to do inspections on that construction. And then, of course, when wells are plugged, we also do inspections there. In addition to the well site inspections, we also have some associated facilities or midstream inspections. The associated facility is related to pipelines, and it's essentially anywhere that a pipeline comes out of the ground and does something at the surface. It connects to another pipeline, connects to other equipment, or to a well site. Anywhere where that happens, we do an inspection on those points to make sure that they're clean, they're sealed up, and that everything is appropriate. Of course, we also follow up on complaints. I'm very pleased to say that we really have very, very few complaints here about the operations in the city. Certainly, we have comments from the public from time to time with different perspectives on oil and gas, but in terms of the actual operations, we have very few complaints. One of the ones we had this year was noise on the Yellow North site that's up near the acre parcel north of I-70. The complaint came from a resident that was actually in unincorporated Adams County. Nevertheless, we follow up on any complaint that we would receive. Our inspector was out there talking to the resident, visited them in their home, talked about their concerns, and the operator made some adjustments to their operations, and that work has all been completed now. Also this year, we purchased a specialized inspection camera. This is called a FLIR camera. It is an infrared camera. It's quite expensive. It's $95,000. That was funded by some missing royalties that I was able to locate. Talk about that here in a couple of slides. This camera allows us to see volatile organic compounds, VOCs, that might be escaping from, like, for example, threaded connections, where two pipes connect together on a well site. These are things not visible to the naked eye. There's no liquids. It's not a spill on the ground. It's something that's only visible with the specialized equipment. We are able to find these, and when Forrest goes out and does the inspections, he may find one piece on a well site that is leaking into the air. And when I say one, I would provide the context there that on a well site, there are literally thousands of such connections where two pipes come together or a pipe connects to a piece of equipment that has the potential for leaking. And to find only one out of thousands of opportunities is really, really extraordinary. Again, goes to the high level of work that Crestone is doing for us here in the city. Nevertheless, if they weren't corrected, these leaks would be going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's to our benefit for our environment to have those stopped. It's also a benefit to the operator because that's product that they could be keeping in their system in the pipeline and selling. So it's a win-win for both of us. Spills. So we've had 4 minor spills this year. You can see the dates there, and also in the second column, the number of barrels that was spilled. These, again, are very low volumes of spills, but they are reportable to COGCC. In some cases, spills, even if they're on top of a liner and they never actually even get to the dirt, they're still required to be reported to COGCC. And that's one of the reasons that most people would say that the rules in Colorado are very strict. In fact, in many cases, the strictest rules in the nation at the state level. So these are things that we do track and keep up with. We make sure that if there is an incident or a spill, that it's cleaned up right away, which Creststone's very good about doing that. We also make sure we discuss with them and make sure they analyze why it occurred and what happened so that they can apply that knowledge to other sites in the city and make sure we avoid spills in the future. All right, let's talk a little bit about income. The first area of income that we get as a city is, as a division, is inspection fees. We do charge an annual inspection fee to the operators. These are the amounts that you can see on the screen, both upstream well site operators and midstream operators, which is the pipelines that are throughout the city, related to the production, of course. These amounts are not designed to be income generating net revenue for the city. They are designed to pay for the cost of the salaries of our division, the equipment that we purchase, and of course indirect fees that all city divisions have. We do have an issue with KP Kaufman. As I mentioned before, they have not paid their inspection fee for 2021 nor 2022. We are not alone in that. They don't pay Adams County's fees either, their annual inspection fees, and haven't for a number of years. They believe that they don't have the rights to do that or not required to do that under state law. That's not true, but nevertheless, they aren't paying the fees. We are in discussions with city attorneys about this and how to resolve this. Obviously, $9,000 is not a huge amount currently, but it is adding up year over year. And so we're talking with them about what's the appropriate way to address this with KP Kaufman. The next area of income is royalties. Again, a good topic of conversation that comes up pretty frequently. The first line there is Creststone Peak Resources. These are from wells that are actually within the city limits themselves. $142,000 in the last 12 months. I have a graph on that next that we'll talk about what that looks like on a monthly basis. Again, that is wells producing from Creststone that are in the city limits themselves. The other area of royalties that we receive is royalties that are related to properties that Aurora Water has purchased in other parts of the state. The next 3 examples are all from Weld County up north. And so these are properties that Aurora Water purchased for water rights primarily, but in many cases, they also came with oil and gas rights. And in some cases, there are producing wells on these properties or associated with the properties. So we've had $2 million from Occidental Petroleum, Oxy. That goes into the Aurora Water account. Again, that's the last 12 months. The last 2 items on this list are something I'm especially pleased with. So this is Great Western. Again, this is wells up in Weld County. As I begin to get into the division and look at the royalties that were coming in and start looking at the properties that we and Aurora Water has in different parts of the state, I realized that there were some properties that the city was not being paid royalties on at all. And so I reached out to find out what was going on. Great Western is the operator of those wells. They've merged with PDC now. And the bottom line is when an operator gets ready to drill a well and produce a well, they will create a page for each of the mineral owners called a division order. And that division order states it very explicitly to 8 decimal places, usually exactly the percentage that they're going to pay to each mineral owner on the production that comes. It's expected that the mineral owners would then sign those division orders and return them to the operator. Colorado law prohibits operators from withholding payment of royalties simply for the reason they don't have a signed division order, but practically speaking, a lot of operators do withhold mineral royalty payments. They put them in an escrow account until they do have an actual signed division order. While we had signed the leases, in these cases and wells that have been producing since 2018, the division orders had never been signed by the city. So I located those, got a copy of the division orders. We signed them. We got them to the operator. In late last year, we got $2 million in 2 payments that came into the city. And then, since those wells are now in a monthly pay status, we've been receiving about $70,000 a month. So a total of another $700,000. The grand total there being $2.8 million. Again, these were fees that are royalties that were due to the city, but were not being paid. So very pleased that our division's been able to work and get these amounts actually into the city budget. These are unbudgeted amounts. They do go into the Aurora Waters account. They were unbudgeted and unexpected from what I can determine. This is a graph of those values that I just had on the last slide, kind of to show you what it looks like on a monthly basis. Please note that the scale on the left, the vertical scale, is a logarithmic scale. I had to do that to get all the numbers on here. So Crestone and Blue has been very consistent, about $10,000 per month. We expect that those will go up in 2023 based on the new drilling that they're doing, the new leases that we've taken with Crestone. Oxy there is in the gray. They were about $20,000 per month, but they drilled some new wells this year. They're now over $100,000 per month. And then, of course, Great Western that I mentioned, the 2 large payments we got end of last year, and then about $70,000 a month ongoing. We also facilitate the Oil and Gas Advisory Committee. Very pleased with the work that they do. We did a field tour back in June with some of the members that were available. Crestone was very gracious to allow us to come out to their site and take a tour, which went very well. We've had 1 new member and 5 reappointments this year. Those went through council, and then there is 1 open industry position. So if anyone's aware of someone that works for a licensed operator and would like to apply to that position, we would welcome that to be a part of the committee. Some other items we've done in addition to our regular normal work, identifying the status of all the plugged wells. That's an important effort. We presented to council on the reverse setbacks and the permanent easement to the city around plugged wells. We are finalizing the language of that ordinance now, and we'll be bringing it forth to a Planning and Zoning Commission and then to council after the first of the year. Air monitoring network. So we received funds in the budget in 2022 to do some analysis and research on what's the air quality in Aurora, because there's very little data on that. This is not just in the oil and gas producing area. This is in the entire city that we were looking at. We've back in the spring, we did had a third party come with a mobile sampling van. They sampled for several dozen different constituents in the air. The bottom summary of that data, the bottom line is that the air in Aurora is very clean, and we're very pleased with that. We do have some dollars, and we're sending out an RFP tomorrow for purchasing some air monitoring equipment. We'll get that set up in different areas around the city, present that data on a website so that members of the public can see what the air quality is in real time. We applied for an EPA grant last year or beginning of this year for some additional air quality equipment. Since I created these slides, we were notified just last week that we were not approved for that grant. However, I will say that a group called the Black Parents United Foundation here in Aurora did receive a grant for some air monitoring equipment in Aurora, which is very exciting. I've reached out to Cherie there with that organization, and would be happy to coordinate with them in any way that we can so that we don't duplicate locations and things like that. So we'll try to work together with them and make sure that we're not conflicting with the work that they're doing. Some other things, we've of course participated in multiple rulemakings with COGCC. Our team participated in the Energy and Environment Symposium out in Rifle back in April. I was honored to be asked to be a panel speaker at that event. We're continuing our work on the research of unpaid royalties. I just found $50,000 last month from Crestone Peak Resources that was also unpaid because of a lack of a division order being signed. So I think there's some more dollars out there. We've been running the competitive lease sales. That's resulted in over $1 million of direct immediate income, and then an expected future income of over $13 million which again will be coming in the next 5 years and ongoing after that. There is some, Crestone is also drilling some wells east of Ward 6, so east of Aurora Reservoir and southeast of Aurora Reservoir. Those wells are in Arapahoe County, so they'll be permitted through Arapahoe County in the state, but they're drilling back under the neighborhoods of Ward 6, and many of those residents own the minerals under their neighborhood homes. And so they're being contacted for leasing purposes, and I've attended multiple town halls and fielded many emails and phone calls from residents in Aurora who are interested to learn more about the process and what's going on and what this means that they're being asked to lease their minerals. And then finally, just last month, Karen Hancock retired, and our division has been given the responsibility for all of the environmental issues in the city that she was previously caring for. I'm very excited for that opportunity to contribute our skills to that here in the city, and we'll be adding those things in as we go. I've had meetings with her before she left, got connected with many of the external partners that she worked with in regards to environmental issues, and so we'll be taking care of those in the immediate future. And then finally, some future initiatives. In 2023, the big push right now is to finish up our map-based website. That's been in the works for quite some time. We were very close to getting that done. That's actually probably going to roll out here before the end of the year. Marie and I just had some training this week on getting access to our webpage and how we can modify that rather than going through the communications department. They've been very gracious to help us in the past, but it's time that we kind of take authority over that and start making those changes to the webpage itself. Incorporating the environmental issues I just mentioned, completing the plugging of the 2 old shut-in wells. We'd love to see that done next year. We'll begin an annual soil testing over P&A wells, again, just to confirm that those are in good shape, that there's no elevation of hydrocarbons in the soil around those wells. And then future years, we may hire an additional inspector if needed. Forrest does a great job with the work that we have now, but as we get additional wells, we may have to hire an additional inspector. Updating the oil and gas manual if needed, creating additional informational materials, physically locating all the currently plugged wells. That's something that we do primarily in conjunction with developers. So when a developer moves into an area where there are plugged wells, again, we attend the pre-app, we make sure they know that there's a plugged well on their project area, and then we work with them to locate that well and then figure out what's the next step. Is it in good shape? Does it need to be replugged? And then we help them to figure out those opportunities. And then we're going to complete the search of the city property records for unpaid royalties. And then finally, one thing that's been on my list since the beginning of the division is would love to consider adding in permitting and inspections for other types of energy resources, such as solar, wind, geothermal, into our division. I think that our division does a great job with a very small number of employees. We have 2 right now, plus myself. We do a very lean operation, and I think that we could bring our skills to bear on other types of energy production in the city. That's a long-term goal, and I'll be working on that in the coming year. Probably have some details about that maybe at this time next year. And with that, that is the end of my prepared presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for that presentation. Councilmember Zvonek or Lawson, do you have anything?
Yes, Councilmember Jurinsky, I just had a question. Jeffrey, thank you for all the work that you've done on all of this. I mean, you've done a fabulous job, and I really appreciate the work that you're continuing to do. Just a question on when you were talking about the leaking, and I know that those are you get those under control immediately. But is there any for any type of surrounding homes, even though you get them under control and you stop the leakage and you take care of it, is there any type of notification that's just letting people know in neighbors or communities know that if it is within that boundary or whatever that occurred, just for transparency purposes?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Lawson. We do not have any notification of these specific leaks, and the reason is because the volume is so tiny that there really isn't anything that is going to be noticeable, even at the air monitors around the location itself that the operator puts up. What we see, and we have videos of this, is the volume of leaks we typically see are what you might see when you're gassing your own personal vehicle at the gas station. The VOCs that are coming off of the liquid gasoline that's going in, there are VOCs there. You can see that. We've done videos of that with our camera. So you can see the volume that's coming out while you're doing a refueling operation. That's kind of the volume that you're seeing on a lot of these leaks. They're not large, they're not major, and they're, like I said, they're not otherwise noticeable unless you had this specialized camera.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else?
I have one question. Jeffrey, I don't know if this falls within your division or not, but I learned about the local government coalition that includes us, apparently Denver and Boulder, filing party status to participate in the AQCC's process for the SIP. And I know there's some concern that challenging the SIP and asking for additional rulemaking could lead to the EPA potentially holding back transportation dollars. And I just wondered if is that a decision, the city's decision to be a party to that, something that comes from your division or city management, or where does that come from?
It typically goes through my division. So the first thing that will happen, I'm part of the local government roundtable, which is just a monthly meeting of other people in the metro area in my position in different jurisdictions. And then we talk about different things that are coming up, what's going on in our jurisdictions, any state rulemaking that's going on. In terms of the local government coalition, we have participated in the past in some of those efforts to encourage rulemaking in different regards. We don't always do that. What we really look at is see what is being requested, what's the language that's being used in those requests, and is it something that matches with our expectations in Aurora? Would it be helpful for our community or not? And then, is it something that we can participate in? So I typically would share those with Deputy City Manager to get, his thoughts on those and where we want to go before we would actually file something. So we do have some discussions, but they do generate or originate from my department in general.
And so is this, what was the reasoning for us to ask for or to modify the SIP and to ask for additional rulemaking? And this is specifically on the ozone, going from severe to whatever the one step behind severe is. Was there a reason for that we decided to engage on it?
Some of those are not related to oil and gas. Some of those requirements are other types of industries. And so there was the language that was used, in the documents that are being prepared for filing, seemed reasonable to me in terms of how they would affect the environment, and seemed to be positive rules that would be helpful for the communities that were being represented by the coalition.
And so if the SIP doesn't get changed, and so essentially what we might be doing by being a party to this is just holding up transportation dollars, because it seems like it's highly unlikely that the plan that's put together in order to get from severe to, I'm struggling with the word that's before it, that it's unlikely that that's going to change with additional rulemaking or even challenging it. And so I guess one of my concerns is that we might potentially be, like I said, having the EPA hold up those federal transportation dollars that the city desperately needs as a result of us being engaged in this. And again, if there's a likelihood of having something change that would be positive for the city, it would seem to make sense. But if there's not, I'm struggling to understand why we would be a party to it.
Sure, that's a great perspective. I'm not up on the transportation dollar holdup, so let me research that issue and I'll get back to you on what that looks like, because I'm not familiar with that part of the issue.
I think it's only until the SIP is approved, but I'm not. That could be, and that's where the challenging and the asking for the additional rulemaking could hold up the final approval of it. Severe. So to get from severe back to serious, and so and again, maybe that it doesn't actually impact us, but it seems like that's a potential concern that we ought to look at before we challenge it, and especially if there's a low probability of actually changing the SIP.
And Councilmember Zvonek, if I may, Councilmember Jurinsky.
Go ahead.
Janine Rustad, Director of Planning and Development Services. And one of the advantage of oil and gas or oil in the or energy and the environment, hopefully soon coming under Planning and Development Services, is we will make sure we have the coordination with the Transportation Division. So we'll work on that. And as Jeffrey said, get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Jurinsky, this is Brad Pierce from the Oil and Gas Committee.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to put a plug in for the Oil and Gas Advisory Committee. Jeffrey had the slide that talked about our committee. So we meet, our next meeting is next Wednesday, November 16th on WebEx at 4 o'clock. We meet every other month on the third Wednesday of every other month at 4 o'clock on WebEx. So in other words, that'll be January, March, May, July. And then in terms of our vacancy on our committee for an industry person, just wanted to expand a little bit. So the industry person has to work for an oil and gas operator or rig company or other service company that does work in Aurora. The applicant from the industry has to be a registered voter, and the operator or the company that he or she works for has to be registered with the COGCC. So just want to put a plug out there for anybody who may know someone who may be interested in applying for the industry vacancy. So thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything? Okay, with that, it doesn't look like anybody has anything to report. So for the next meeting, it's tentatively scheduled for December 14th at 8:30, but I like to keep PED and public safety in the same week. And I know that on the 15th of December, we can't have public safety that month. So next month, so I would like PED to be December 7th at 8:30. Is there any objection to that?
No.
Okay, perfect. Then December 7th at 8:30 a.m. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Have a great day.